watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
I think for most of us in this room, and I'm sure for this group of people on the dais, the issue of intermarriage is really about the next generation, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. What will happen to our children and our grandchildren, and as a result, what will happen to our Jewish community. So if the goal is to have a growing rather than a declining Jewish population, a Jewish population that's actively and passionately engaged in Jewish life, that is identified and connected with other Jews around the world, the question is, what's the best approach to this issue in our community? We've brought together two well-known proponents of two different approaches, and we will hear from them first. Edmund Case, who's the founder of interfaithfamilies.com, and the approach that he will be talking about is welcoming the intermarried. And then we will have Professor Steven Cohen, who I think many of you know has been promoting the concept of in-marriage, which is not a concept that any of us would probably disagree with, but we will have some conversation about that, I am sure, at this session. And without further ado, Ed Case.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. I want to thank Shalom TV for filming this. I didn't know I was going to be on TV, and my mother, who is 92 years old, is going to be thrilled that she gets to watch this. I'm not here to promote intermarriage. I don't promote intermarriage as a positive, but we all know it is a huge reality. You know, half of Jews are intermarrying. That means that 2/3 of new households are intermarried households, and half of young adults now have intermarried parents. Who is sitting at your Seder table? I mean, these are our friends, children, siblings, and cousins. We can take steps to engage interfaith couples in Jewish life and community. We can ignore them and let them drift away, or we can push them away. And the choices have huge consequences, because with half of Jews intermarrying, if more than half would raise their children as Jews, our community would grow and it would be enriched. But if fewer than half raise their children as Jews, then we will wither away. So the tagline on every page of the interfaithfamily.com website states our mission, encouraging Jewish choices and a welcoming Jewish community. In the past 12 months, over 425,000 unique visitors have come to our website. They come looking for personal stories about how other people in interfaith relationships deal with holidays and life cycle events and other common issues. They come for our referral service that is helping over 1,500 couples a year find a rabbi to officiate or co-officiate at their weddings. They come looking for our network's listings of Jewish organizations and professionals and programs in the communities where they live, in all of your communities. In the 3 days since the GA started, we had, I looked this morning, we had 16 people join our network. One person sadly was looking for a rabbi to do a funeral, and 12 people were looking for rabbis to officiate or co-officiate at their weddings. All of these people are in interfaith relationships, and they are looking to engage in Jewish life and community. Many people ask me why I do this work, and I do it because of my own personal experience, but also many friends, and now the thousands of people who come to our website. I know that the meaning and the value that Jewish living makes available does not have to be just for Jews. It is available for their partners too. And I do this work because I believe that engaging interfaith families in Jewish life and community is the single most important opportunity that our community faces. But the actual question is not what, can we encourage in marriage, is not what I want to talk about first. What I want to talk about first is how can we most effectively engage interfaith families in our communities. And at interfaithfamily.com, we think we have learned what interfaith families want. And there are two things that you can do to engage them. One is to communicate an explicit message of welcome, and the second is to offer services and programs for them. So I believe that every synagogue and every Jewish organization should have on its door a sign that says, interfaith families welcome here. Now, whether it's a real sign on the door, or whether it's on the home page of the website, or whether it's on literature that's available when you come in, the message needs to be made loud and clear that interfaith families are welcome. Every federation could put on its invitations what Boston's CJP does. On every invitation to every program, it says, CJP welcomes those who would like to connect with the Jewish community and encourages the participation of interfaith families, couples, and significant others in all its activities. Now, to make this explicit message tangible, you can offer services and programs, and there are 4 things that I think are needed in every community. The first thing is that many interfaith couples are looking for Jewish clergy to officiate at their weddings, and every community could help its young couples find them and not make it difficult, and try to shield them from the negative experiences that many report. A participant at one of our focus groups said, rejection by a rabbi stays with you. It turns you off to the synagogue, and it turns you off to Judaism. The second thing we can do is offer discussion groups for young interfaith couples about how to have religion in their lives. I mean, every place where these are offered, and there aren't that many, sadly, but every place where they're offered, like the Washington, D.C. JCC, by Reformed Jewish Outreach in Boston, couples come, they have skilled facilitators, they talk about how they can have religion in their lives, they learn from each other, and they gravitate towards Jewish choices. It happens all the time. The third thing is that many partners who aren't Jewish are interested in Jewish life, and sadly, again, many of their Jewish partners are ill-equipped to help them. Every community should offer an introductory program about Jewish life, like the Union for Reform Judaism's A Taste of Judaism, which is probably the most effective outreach program that's ever been designed or implemented. And it should be marketed as explicitly for people in interfaith relationships, along with others. And the fourth thing is that many couples are interested in raising their children as Jews, but they need help. And every community could offer a program like the Jewish Outreach Institute's Mother Circle program. Many people are interested in Jewish education for their children, but aren't ready to join a synagogue. Every community could offer a program like Stepping Stones in Denver, a Sunday school for young children from unaffiliated interfaith families with parallel education for their parents. Okay, so now I want to turn and ask a question. Why is it that most communities do not extend explicit messages of welcome or offer programs and services for interfaith families? The amount of communal spending on this issue is woefully inadequate. You know, I've calculated that of $3 billion in annual foundation and federation spending, maybe $3 million, which is 0.1%, is devoted to this purpose. Why is that? Why is there such a disconnect? Most people, if you ask what's the biggest opportunity or challenge in the Jewish community, they'll say intermarriage, but nothing is done about it. Well, I believe it's because too many people have negative, ambivalent attitudes about intermarriage. Now, some people believe that intermarriage is bad because research shows that there are lower Jewish behaviors and attitudes among intermarrieds than inmarrieds. So I expect Steven may say this morning, for example, that in-married Jews are 5 times more likely to raise their children as intermarried Jews. And of course, Israeli leaders and media, that's all you ever hear about. Whenever intermarriage is mentioned in the Israeli press, it's always equated with assimilation. I want to ask you to remember that there is another research approach taken mostly by Brandeis social scientist Len Sachs, who says that Jewish behaviors and attitudes are determined not by the fact of in-marriage or intermarriage, but by one's experiences of Jewish living and education and friendship. And he also says that interventions can work. And I would say that we don't really know what surveys would show about behaviors of intermarried families if the community actually did extend explicit welcoming messages and offered programs and services for this population. And how should we respond to the fact that intermarried families have lower Jewish behaviors and attitudes if that's the case? Should we write them off, or should we do what we can to try to raise those numbers? Now, some people say that intermarriage can be prevented or reduced to insignificant levels by exposing Jews to intensive Jewish experiences. Well, I want to say that I am just as much in favor as anyone else of Jewish camps and day schools and Israel trips and guiding young people to places and experiences where they will meet other Jews. And if fewer participants in these experiences intermarry, that's a fine result, but many of them still will. The last year's Birthright Israel study showed that 28% of the trip participants who had since married were intermarried. The value of these intensive experiences is not as a deterrent to intermarriage, but that they increase the participants' desire to have Jewish families and Jewish children, regardless of who they marry. So what messages should we communicate about intermarriage? Now, some people say we're plenty welcoming already. From my vantage point, that is very out of touch. When we do focus groups, people say they don't feel welcomed when they hear a "don't intermarry" message, when they feel subtle pressure to convert, when they go in a synagogue and they experience suspicion. These are people who are saying this now. This is not old history. One user gave me this input for today. I asked users, how would you respond to this question that's been posed? My husband and I have sat through too many lectures where the speaker eventually had to put in their 2 cents about intermarriage being bad, bad, bad. So on one hand, we're invited into the program, but please put up with the insults we'll be throwing your way about your marriage. Now, some people think we can effectively communicate a message to young people that they should not intermarry, that they should marry other Jews. Well, I would say that we've tried that. We've tried that for decades, and it failed miserably. And if anything, young people today are offended by this message. They judge others as individuals, not by group characteristics. The millennial generation has a non-exclusivist ideology. That's what Jack Wertheimer reported in the recent study about the young Jewish leaders, and those were the leaders, if you can imagine what the people who aren't the leaders are thinking. Now, Steven has said that in marriage is a Jewish norm, like working to improve the world or many other Jewish norms. Well, I would say that norms change. And given the huge reality of intermarriage in the liberal Jewish world, I question whether in marriage is still a Jewish norm. And Steven has criticized Jewish leaders for not explicitly promoting the norm of intermarriage and says they shouldn't hold back if people will be offended or insulted. Well, there's a big difference between these different kinds of norms. You know, working for a better world is something no one ever does enough of, and being told or exhorted to do more is not going to push people away. But if you guilt a young person that their choice of a partner violated a norm irrevocably, that does push people away. And I don't believe that in our porous world where communication is instantly spread everywhere, I don't believe we can promote the norm of in-marriage before marriage occurs, but then say, oh, but after you're intermarried, we'll welcome you and we'll do something for you. I don't think that we can promote the norm of in-marriage in the conservative world or in the Orthodox world or in the Federation world, but not in the Reform world. These messages go out, it's like the sack of feathers that blow out on the wind, and we cannot control where the message goes. Promoting in-marriage does not stop people from intermarrying, but it does leave them alienated and feeling rejected by Jewish communities if they do intermarry. When we indicate that in-marriage is preferable, if we're not very, very careful to not demean intermarriage at the same time, we are sending a message to people that they're bad if they married out and their partner is second class. And when that happens, not only the couple is pushed away, their parents and their relatives are too. So I'm saying we have to fundamentally change our attitude towards intermarriage. We need to recognize the potential for positive coming out of it. And we need to stop talking about intermarriage as a bad thing. That's the key message I would like to leave on this subject. We need to stop talking about intermarriage as a bad thing. You know, at interfaithfamily.com, we hear all the time what one user told me to say today. Because of my interfaith marriage, I live a more Jewish life. I have educated myself and my children about Jewish practice to a far greater extent than I would have if I had married a Jew. And the flip side is, ask any Reform rabbi who the most active, most involved congregants are who take on primary responsibility for the Jewish life of their family and their children, and they will tell you it's often the parents who are not Jewish. So most of us in this room probably would say that we want our children to marry other Jews. But isn't what we really want is for our grandchildren to be Jewish? And I would submit to all of you that we will collectively have a better chance of having more Jewish grandchildren if the message that our community gives to young people is this: living Jewishly is a great source of meaning and value. It's been wonderful for us. We hope you'll want it for yourself. If you do want it for yourself, we hope you will choose a partner who will be supportive of your Jewish engagement and involvement. And you and your family and your children will always be welcome, and we will always support whatever Jewish choices you choose to make. The lesson that I've learned at interfaithfamily.com is that our children's partners do not have to be Jewish themselves to support our children and our grandchildren being Jews and living Jewishly. And we need to be extremely, extremely welcoming to people, because young people do not want to be part of a community that is not that welcoming. Thank you.
I really do want to thank Ed. It was Ed Case who organized the session, and I want to thank him for taking the lead in creating a session with a platform that we both can stand on, talking about welcoming the intermarried and promoting in marriage. And it was his initiative, and I really do want to publicly express my deep appreciation for him moving forward in this direction. Now, Ed and I are often seen as ideological opponents, but it turns out that we agree on a lot. And I'm even more convinced after hearing Ed's talk about how much we agree. We both agree that Jewish communities and leaders should welcome the intermarried. Certainly Jewish parents, grandparents, and families should welcome the intermarried and their families. There's absolutely no question about that. And we also agree, and I'm so glad to have heard Ed say this, on the need for more Jewishly intensive educational associational experiences. We also agree that intermarriage represents the central challenge to Jewish continuity in the United States. Otherwise, why is this man in business? And we agree that there are things that you and I can do to address the intermarriage challenge. My central concern is not with the advocates for the intermarried, such as Ed, but with the community's lack of urgency with dealing with the intermarriage challenge to Jewish demographic and cultural continuity. In fact, the work of interfaithfamily.com, NJOI, and the EORJ Outreach Department, and many, many others, they reflect a healthy sense of urgency about the matter of intermarriage that I wish were shared by our federation system and leadership. Let me explain. As Ed pointed out, right now, about 50% of all Jews are marrying non-Jews who do not convert to Judaism. Maybe some of them will, I hope they do. The intermarriage rate among the non-Orthodox is about 6 times as high as it is among the Orthodox, and you'll see where I'm going with that. It's far higher among the Jewish children, forget the children, but the Jewish children of intermarried than among the Jewish children of unmarried. So intermarriage has a spiral all its own. It goes up and up as time goes on. However they may be raised, only about a quarter of the children of the intermarried grow up and consider themselves Jews when they reach adulthood. A quarter. The much trumpeted rate of 60% of intermarried couples raising their children as Jews in Boston, attributed by Ed and others, maybe Barry, to welcoming, is actually matched in several places with very weak welcoming efforts, such as Hartford and Baltimore. They also get 60%. I think there are technical reasons why the questions produce those rates there and elsewhere. But it turns out that the rates by which children are raised as Jews is far lower in parts of the country like San Francisco, where the intermarried are more welcomed by the whole culture, than in parts of the country such as Boston, where stronger Jews are among those marrying non-Jews. I think that's what's happening. When strong Jews marry non-Jews, they produce more children being raised as Jews, and that's the primary issue here. In any event, in terms of the ultimate choices as adults, we are still losing the war for the hearts and minds of the children of mixed ancestry. Even more frightening, as Ed points out, the grandchildren, is that less than 10% of the grandchildren of the intermarried identify as Jews. Less than 10% of the grandchildren of the intermarried identify as Jews. And I'm so glad that Ed cited Len Sachs. Len Sachs also wrote that adult children of intermarriage are significantly less likely to raise their own children as Jews compared with their peers who grew up in married homes. From a continuity perspective, this is an important difference, I should say so. So, as a result of intermarriage, low fertility, and delayed marriage, a whole other topic, non-Orthodox Jewry has entered a population meltdown, one that will gravely restrict the Jewish choices available to your grandchildren and mine. To illustrate, the Orthodox represent 8% of my generation in the American Jewish population. They now constitute 23% of my grandchildren's generation. For every 100 Orthodox Jews my age, we have, God bless them, 192 children being raised in Orthodox homes. For every 100 non-Orthodox adults my age, we have not 90, not 80, not 70, not 60, but 55 Jewish children being raised in non-Orthodox homes. At some point, you have to be concerned. The signs of Jewish population meltdown are all around us. They are more palpable than the signs of impending economic meltdown that they were to George Soros and Paul Krugman in 2006 and 2007. They are more incontrovertible than the signs of global warming today. Note the many areas of decline in members of Jewish organizations, from B'nai B'rith to Hadassah to the now defunct American Jewish Congress, in the number of donors, not the amount of money, but the number of donors to Jewish Federation campaigns over the years, in the number of conservative congregants, conservative Judaism having the oldest congregational profile of all, and now in the number of Jewish members of Reformed temples, where a very large number of intermarried families over the last 20, 30 years have in effect replaced in-married families. Well, that means that far fewer Jewish adults are in Reformed temples today than were their counterparts 20 or 30 years ago. Reform movement has a smaller market share of Jewish adults. It's less. In other words, my grandchildren and yours will be facing a world in which their vital Jewish choices will be highly limited in both geography and in ideology. In the face of all this evidence, the Federation system and its leaders, even those most committed and most effective advocates of Jewish education and community building, they believe that we have made huge progress in the battle against the ill effects of intermarriage. And they feed the destructive complacency that impedes action to raise the rate of in-marriage. For example, in a recent report published by Boston CJP and co-authored by our own Barry Shrage, who is among the most effective. I would tell you how effective it is, but I don't want to insult the people who think they're effective as well. We read, intermarried families choosing to raise their children as Jews are deeply engaged in Jewish practice. In what are widely seen as traditional Jewish ritual practices, intermarried families with Jewish children are generally as observant as in-married Jewish families. But the same report tells us of sharp differences between the intermarried families raising Jewish children and in-married families. For example, let's compare conservative families. We learn that of the intermarried kids, just past bar mitzvah, just 13% are in Jewish education. Among the conservative kids, 61%. That's the difference. Synagogue membership is twice as high among the conservatives as among the intermarried. 0% of conservative and 3% of Reform families have Christmas trees sometimes in their homes, probably around Christmas. The number reaches 82% among the intermarried. And those who say Christmas trees don't mean borscht, I can tell you that from all of our research, if you look at people who had a Christmas tree in their home years ago, their rates of involvement in Jewish life are far, far, far lower. It's a very strong ethnic predictor. And while 24% of the conservative kids have been to Israel, God bless them, as of 15% of the Reform teenagers, among the intermarried kids, 1%. 1%. How Barry and his co-authors can proclaim that intermarried families, quote, are deeply engaged in Jewish practice is baffling, to say the least. Moreover, it deprives our leadership of the sense of urgency it needs to take action that can significantly influence the in-marriage rate. Not to push it down to zero, but we can influence that rate. It turns out, from all our research, that all forms of intensive Jewish educational experience influence the in-marriage rate. We have impact of preschools on intermarriage years later. We know of the powerful impact of day schools, which reduce the intermarriage rate by 14 to 18 percentage points, non-Orthodox and Orthodox alike. We know of the impact of youth groups. We know of the impact of Jewish camps. We know of the impact of Hillel involvement, of Jewish studies, of short-term trips to Israel, and most recently now with research on Masa, of long-term trips to Israel. All of this stuff actually works. But beyond Jewish education, social networks, just Jews knowing Jews, are as vital for in-marriage, not for all things, but just for in-marriage, as is Jewish education. Zip code is a terrific predictor of intermarriage. Unfortunately, we can't change people's zip code, although I once did advise Arnie Eisen that he should stay on the East Coast, but he came back to New York. We can, zip code. We need to tend not only to Jewish education, but to Jewish association. While meaningful Jewish experiences are great and ideologically necessary, meaningless Jewish association, just Jews in contact with other Jews, is especially critical for boosting the in-marriage rate. Social networks promote Jewish in-marriage. Most Jews really do want to marry Jews, and they help people who are alongside the social networks find other dating and marriage partners. In other words, if there's a strong social network, it serves the people who are in it and the people who are alongside of it. And if we lose those networks, then we lose the ability of Jews to refer dating partners to other Jews. We can do a much better job of supporting the wide variety of activities by and for Jewish young adults, which is why, people know me from my work in intermarriage, but I spent a lot of time writing about all the wonderful new things that young adults are doing and saying, let's look at those things. Let's look at independent minyanim, which are not bastions of only of the most committed. People involved in Jewish social justice, which is growing. People involved in Jewish culture, in music, in art, in dance, in literature. People involved in self-motivated Jewish learning. Every time I get up, I announce the figure for how many Limud festivals there were last year, and someone corrects me. So my last number is 46. There were 46 Limud festivals around the world in the last year, up from one in 1982, indicative of the drive for Jewish learning. New media, the billions of pages on the internet. And in addition, we can hire rabbis to work in conservative and reform congregations to tend to the hundreds, if not thousands, of potential converts, largely non-members, who receive little attention from our already overburdened congregational rabbis. We can build cafes in areas of new Jewish settlement, Jewish cafes, with more Jewish film festivals, more Jewish music events, and more Jewish travel experiences. We can do all this. Yes, we can. But only if we have the will and the sense of urgency. Claiming that intermarried families are already deeply engaged in Jewish practice saps that will and deprives us of that urgency. Telling Jewish leaders the truth is necessary, not only as a matter of moral principle, which it is, it's the only way that we will begin to address the most critical challenge to the Jewish people of our time. Thank you.
The most important thing that Steve said, of course, he's right about almost everything. In fact, he's totally right. And in fact, because the one thing that wasn't on his list of things that will stop intermarriage is just saying no. I don't think he's got a lot of research that shows that. There was a time when our parents, I remember this quite clearly, when my mother told me that she would actually commit suicide. And it actually, it has to have an impact on the sexual attraction of people you're going out with. It just has to. It's an image that just fills your mind, and it will not go away under any circumstances. So, but the truth is that, just to use a personal example, the truth is I wouldn't have the heart to say that to my own kids. I wouldn't have the heart to threaten suicide or to even tell them I won't love them. And we're Orthodox, but I don't have the heart to tell them that. What's more, just to put it, why he's so right, why Steve is so incredibly right. If I ever said to my son Ari or my daughter Neely, I want to warn you against intermarriage, my kids would say to me, Dad, take an aspirin and lie down. You're obviously having a very bad day, and you need some help here. And the reason is that they both went to Orthodox day schools. They grew up in an Orthodox home. They all went to Israel. And what sticks in my mind is that my son will always remember being on my shoulders on Simchas Torah, and how much joy he had, how much joy my daughter had, and they will want that for their own kids with all their heart and all their soul. So either they're going to marry a person who will convert and live a full Jewish life, or they will marry Jewish people, or thank God they're both already married. So my granddaughter, Ayelet, by the way, is the cutest baby who's ever been born. I had to add that. And my son's financial services company is called Aliyah Capital. So that doesn't make me entirely happy, but I'm very proud. So the question is, what do we do? Now, my feeling in our federation, in our community, is that it's all about positive and all about love. I can't do it any other way. I don't know how to do it any other way. I have no evidence that putting a big sign outside our federation that says intermarriage is a bad thing, I have no evidence of what will happen. But I know that every person who I talk to who's intermarried, that I come to with a message of love and engagement, with a message that Judaism is a 3,500-year-old tradition that's filled with meaning and purpose and community and Torah. Every person who I come to like that walks away thinking a little bit more about the first contact I have with wealthy, young families is not about how much money they will give. It's about how they're going to raise their kids and what it means to be Jewish. And it doesn't matter whether they're in-married or intermarried. That message always works. It almost always works. Nobody's ever said to me, how dare you talk to me about that? You're here to ask me for money. They say, you know what? I haven't given it much thought. I need to think about it. We have so many positive messages, so many positive things that we can do. The question isn't why we're discouraging intermarriage or why one study or another says one thing or another. Steve actually wrote a study that says the children of intermarriage are more spiritual than the children of in-marriage. I'm not going to put that over my building, nor am I necessarily putting the other quote over my building. What I do have on the outside of my building are two quotes. One says, the world stands on three things: on Torah, on the service of God, and on acts of loving kindness. The motto of our federation is Torah and Tzedek and Chesed. And on the inside is the mission statement of the Jewish people from Vayera, which we just read, which says, I have loved him because he will teach his children and his household to follow him by following the way of God, by doing justice and righteousness. We are replete with positive things to do, with positive messages that we can give. But among them is the idea that we respect the dignity of difference, that we love all of our people, that we welcome them in. This is a message that I will live or die by. I'm not encouraging anybody to intermarry. On the other hand, I do have to say that in 40 years of Jewish communal work, let me think about this for a minute, no one has ever called me at 2 o'clock in the morning to ask me who they ought to sleep with. That's actually never happened. Nor have they necessarily asked my advice on who they ought to marry. Federation has nothing much to say about that. Federation has a lot to say about the beauty of Jewish life. Federation has a lot to say about putting its resources into more kids Cohen on birthright. Federation has a lot to say about putting full-time follow-up people on every campus. Federation has a lot to say about putting more kids into day school. Federation has a lot to say about making better afternoon schools. How many federations have any of these things as their number one top priority? The point is, we have so many good things to do together. It really isn't about just saying no. It's really about the beauty of Jewish life. Steve's right. We should be motivated to do so much more. I'm not sure that fear of intermarriage is the thing that's going to get us there. Thank you very much.
I know, this is going to be, by the way, the highest rated program on Shalom Television ever. Full disclosure, on the conference call about this session, after I heard what was going to happen, I said, I shouldn't be on this panel. because I think we're talking about the wrong thing. But I want to start by saying, with all due respect to Professor Cohen, I have study fatigue. You lost me in the middle of all these numbers. And I think we're studying and we're studying and we're studying this issue and many other issues when we already know the answer, right? We have a major communal challenge. It has nothing to do with interfaith families. It has to do with every family. Frankly, Ed, the synagogue should say, everybody welcomed, right? Because we have a problem in our community and we never talk about it. This is not a micro issue, it's a macro issue. Most of the Jewish community, whether they're intermarried or not, are opting out of Jewish engagement. It's a fact. The numbers are getting worse, not better. And so we can talk about it. And I believe we should be welcoming interfaith families, and we should be welcoming young people, as my dear colleague Barry will say, in terms of sending them to birth, right? And we should be welcoming people that agree with us and people that disagree with us, and find a place in the big tent of Judaism, which is what federations represent, to welcome all people. If we're welcoming, if we show the right value proposition to all Jews about why they should engage, why they should be Jewish, then they'll send their kids to birth, right? Then they'll join synagogues, whether they're interfaith or not, and the community will be better served. But when we start doing what we often do, and by the way, I think, and I'm new, I've been in this job for 10 months, I believe that every single GI I've ever been to has had a session like this, hasn't asked this question: is it the people who are, fully involved, or the interfaith families? Pick one. I mean, I thought that subject was provocative, and I was offended by it. We shouldn't be picking one, we should be picking everyone. So to me, I actually thought I wasn't appropriate for this conversation, because I think it's the wrong conversation. And I think at General Assemblies, we often have the wrong conversations. This is an opportunity for us to sit around and figure out what are the big issues in Jewish life that federations can handle. And the biggest issue is, how do we engage our community, interfaith or not, in Judaism? How do we connect them to the Jewish people, to our community, and to Israel? Period. That's the conversation. And you know what, Steve? You can do 100,000 studies, and you'll find out we have a big problem, and we're dealing with small problems. So I will opt the rest of my time, the other 20 minutes I think I get, to all of you.
When I ran groups in a conservative synagogue for parents and grandparents of interfaith couples, because they wouldn't let me have the couples in themselves, unfortunately, a grandmother of 7 turned to me and said, "Why are our children intermarrying?" with tears in her eyes. And I said to her, because they can, and they will. And that is the reality. So this is the wrong conversation. We need to find a way to make Jewish life engaging, enticing, and embracing all of these different kinds of Jews today. It's not just about the interfaith community. Half of the groups I ran were not just interfaith, but they were intercultural, interracial. We're not addressing these issues. And if you can even call it an issue, it's a reality. Nobody, the American Jewish Committee funded a study that said Jewish parents aren't losing their children anymore. They're not sitting Shiva. Nobody wants to lose their kids. We invest too much in our children. We love them too much. So why are we still having this conversation? The real conversation is, and we have to put our efforts and money into finding a way to make Jewish life engaging and to embrace all. The reason that there are so many interfaith couples in Reform congregations is because they embrace them. It's as simple as that. So let's change the dialogue.
I myself am a product of an interfaith marriage. Obviously, I'm a little bit involved in my faith. So my question to you is, what do you think are the largest issues that children of interfaith marriage face?
I think the largest issue faced in children of intermarriages is identity and attraction of identity. And so, just to reinforce everything we've been saying here today, the more engaging, attractive, and welcoming we can make our Jewish community as a whole for everyone, the better off we're going to be.
As with everything else, I think that children with one Jewish parent have a special need, and there's a special issue there. And the issue is, do they feel that they're Jewish? I mean, what have they heard from their friends or their colleagues? I mean, we have so many stories, unfortunately, of bad experiences, of people saying, "Well, you're not really Jewish," and we get into all the boundary issues. Well, you can't really participate in that ritual, or you can't really do that thing because you're not really Jewish. So I think this is like an attitudinal thing that needs to be addressed, and young people as well as old people need to change their attitude about intermarriage and be fundamentally welcoming.
I just want to answer my colleague Linda. Where are you? The previous book, yeah. And I want to say that I'm trying to offer two corrections. One is that the whole intermarriage issue has focused on people who are already intermarried, and we should welcome them. What else can we do? And you're saying, I think Ed's saying, I'm not sure, there's a tone that says there isn't much that we can do to affect the intermarriage rate. But I'm saying we already have, and we can do more. Since 1980, we have had a sharp rise of Jewish day schools. We've had a gorgeous increase in Jewish camping. We've had billionaires create Jewish leadership fellowships. We've had a revolution in Hillel. We've had vast expansion in Jewish studies. We had the invention of birthright, the invention of Massah, the rise of independent Minanim, Ruth Messenger, and a slew of social justice, rise of culture, rise of Jewish learning, and the invention of Jewish life on the internet. That's what we've done since 1980 to reduce intermarriage. It has that effect. We can do that. Without all that, the intermarriage rate would be much higher today than with it. So, if that's the case, and if we're concerned about more Jews in 2060, I am. I hope you are as well. If you want more Jews in 2060, you'll do the welcoming, but you'll also go back to our federation and say, you know what? And actually, I have a little relationship with John and Elise and a few other people in the federation. We can do this, and we can do a lot more. We can put cafes in downtown Brooklyn. We can do all kinds of things. If we're concerned about the intermarriage rate, we can make a difference. We have, we can, and we should.
And we can also promote all of that, all of which is wonderful stuff, not by saying it reduces intermarriage, but by saying that it increases people's Jewish identity and their desire to have Jewish families and children for themselves. And that doesn't alienate the intermarried people.
That's right.
I can live with that.
So I can live with that. I think that's the bottom line, and I think that we all have a lot of work to do in doing just that, in trying to find the best ways, the most powerful ways to engage all people who want to engage in Jewish life. All of those who are out there who see Jewish life as something that might be for them, to find the ways to bring them in. But also, I think, in light of what Ed has said, and in light of the fact that we are never, in my opinion, this is me, we are never going to be able to stop intermarriage, that we need to think about how we engage with the intermarried and their particular needs. So I thank you all for coming here, for thinking about this issue, and for engaging with it in your communities. And I think you know how to get in touch with all of our presenters if you have other questions to ask them. Thank you.